Canada has just made an unexpected turn in its international policy that could redefine its relationship with the United States, as Donald Trump loses ground. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and now a prominent leader, made it clear in Warsaw that Canada no longer depends on the United States or Trump. This announcement surprised and made a significant impact in Washington, where the America First policy faces a new reality. Canada is taking control of its geopolitical future. While Trump insists on isolationism and threatens tariffs on his allies, Carney delivered a strong message to Europe. Canada is no longer a subordinate partner, but a strong and autonomous ally. His speech in Poland was more than diplomacy. It was a declaration of strategic independence. Carney announced that they will quadruple their defense investment, leaving Pentagon officials stunned. For years, Canadian foreign policy followed U.S. interests in trade, energy, and defense, but that has changed. According to Carney, Canada is ready to lead alongside Europe, not to submit to Washington's decisions. This shift causes irritation among American conservatives who saw Canada as a reliable and dependent neighbor. However, after years of tensions, with Trump, including tariffs and threats, Canadian patience has run out. Carney spoke of shared values with Europe, like freedom and solidarity, but the real message was clear. Canada will no longer follow Trump's whimsical decisions. This stance represents a severe political blow to the Republicans. While Trump uses threats to dominate his trade partners, Canada strengthens its economy, diversifies its alliances, and builds a military force independent of Washington. This marks a new era for Canada that challenges the historic influence of the United States on the continent. How will Trump react? Will he intensify his attacks or underestimate the silent power of the North? The truth is, the narrative has changed. Although many Americans still believe Canada economically depends on them, the facts prove otherwise. Now, Canada makes its own decisions, and this process is just beginning. The importance of Carney's announcement in Poland is enormous. Quadrupling defense spending is no minor detail, but a direct blow to the military dependence Canada has maintained on Washington for decades. From the American perspective, this is a political and strategic earthquake because it was always assumed that Canada, due to its proximity and NATO alliance, depended on U.S. military protection. But that idea just crumbled with a single statement. Canada will invest in defense, modernize its armed forces with advanced technology, and won't ask any U.S. president for permission to do so. This marks a before and after that generates both respect and concern. Carney not only talked about increasing spending on tanks and planes, but also about innovation, research, a strengthened national industry, and partnerships with major European companies like Airbus. The combination of Canadian technology with European industrial capacity will create jobs in Quebec, Ontario, and Alberta, and open an economic ecosystem that cannot be manipulated by tariffs imposed from Washington. In summary, every time Trump threatens to punish Canada with aluminum or steel tariffs, Carney responds by building an alternative economic network with Europe, harshly challenging the economic pressure model the White House applied for years. The most surprising thing is that this message did not originate in Washington or Tegucigalpa, but in Warsaw, a symbolic place that made its impact even stronger. Canada aligns with Europe just as Ukraine fights to hold against the Russian invasion, and Poland has become the key transit point for 90% of military and humanitarian aid, with Canada playing an active role in that chain. This shows that Canada does not wait for instructions from the United States to act, but positions itself as an autonomous leader on the European stage. For those of us living in the United States, this is a harsh reminder of how the America First policy is pushing us away. While a former president insists on closing borders and issuing threats, our closest allies seek new partnerships. Canada is redefining its international relations, leaving behind a secondary role to become a global actor betting on resilience instead of submission. Its words resonate strongly and promise to leave a lasting mark. We were used to Canada following our lead, but today Carney is forging a country that acts with initiative and decides its own path. And this is not limited to military or geopolitical issues, as Carney also addressed nuclear energy, renewables, strategic minerals, aerospace cooperation, and joint projects that diversify the Canadian economy, freeing it from constant dependence on the U.S. market. Thus, if new taxes are imposed tomorrow or trade conflicts erupt, Canada will have a solid Plan B alongside Europe, Asia, and other global markets. For the United States, this reality is uncomfortable because it reveals that our arrogance has made us lose influence. By trying to pressure Canada with tariffs and threats, we have driven its independence. What we see today goes beyond a speech. It is the beginning of an era where Canada does not live in the American shadow, but builds its own center of power. The big question is whether we are losing our most reliable ally due to the stubbornness of a former president. Carney's promise to quadruple defense spending was no accident but a declaration with strong symbolism, acknowledging something few Canadians admit. For years, they failed to meet their NATO commitments, relying too much on U.S. military strength as if it were a guaranteed right. In Warsaw, Carney broke with that history and assured that Canada will stand alongside Poland, a country essential for Ukraine's survival since 90% of the weaponry passes through its territory. With this announcement, Canada makes it clear that it will not be a mere spectator protected by the United States, but a protagonist that invests, takes risks, and leads. For those of us living in the United States, this change is bitter because it highlights what many in Washington ignored for years, that allies no longer trust us blindly, and that the America First rhetoric weakened alliances that once seemed unbreakable. Carney proved it with facts, recalling how Canada was in Normandy, was the first country to support Poland's entry into NATO, and today its troops fight alongside European soldiers in Latvia, showing that this shared history does not need a former president's approval to continue. That historical review was no coincidence but a strategy to show Canadians that they can forge their future with Europe, sharing values like freedom, solidarity, and unity, without being tied to the capricious decisions of an American leader who threatens to annex territories or destroy trade agreements with a single blow. Here lies the heart of the political change. Carney is creating a resilience model that clashes directly with the dependency that marked the bilateral relationship for decades. Moreover, the announcement in Warsaw went beyond the military, as Carney extended the vision to key economic sectors, discussing nuclear energy, renewables, critical minerals, aerospace collaboration with Airbus, and integrating Canadian technology into high-level European projects. This is not just a speech but a plan to protect the Canadian economy from a former president's favorite weapon, tariffs. Remember that during his term he imposed steel and aluminum tariffs under the pretext of national security, a direct insult to a neighbor and historic partner. With this diversification strategy, Carney sends a clear message: the Canadian economy will not be a hostage to any White House. For an American citizen worried about the country's future, this is as impactful as it is concerning, because every time intimidation is used against allies, they seek ways to free themselves from that control, thus weakening U.S. global influence. What once seemed impossible now happens before our eyes. Canada, that reliable neighbor, is moving towards full independence in defense and economy. The psychological impact is strong, since for years the United States considered itself the guardian of the Western order, but now watches how a country with which it shares borders, markets, and culture decides to step out of its shadow and treat Europe as an equal. In Kiev, Carney showed his support for Ukraine, in Warsaw he promised military backing, and in Brussels he could soon seal an economic alliance that leaves the United States out. This is the nightmare no one in Washington wants to acknowledge. We are losing exclusive control over Canada, and the worst part is that this happens because of our own arrogance. The most surprising thing is that this is not just about speeches or isolated diplomatic gestures. We are witnessing a profound change in the geopolitics of North America and the West, because Canada demonstrates it can stand on its own, defend itself without asking Washington for permission, and that its economy no longer depends on the whims of a single leader. For those of us living in the United States, this is a reality check, reminding us that the policies of a president obsessed with tariffs and threats against allies have concrete effects. Now, that neighbor who once depended on us looks us in the eye, unafraid to say enough. Carney did not only talk about defense but also about nuclear energy, renewables, and strategic minerals, which are the future for technological cooperation with Airbus in Europe, and about jobs that will arise in Quebec and Ontario thanks to those alliances. His message was clear. Canada will prosper more by collaborating with Europe than by waiting for Washington's approval. This happens at a crucial moment, as Trump continues with the America First motto, unaware that by closing off, he opens space for his allies to seek new paths, and Canada not only seeks them, but leads. The symbolism is strong. Carney chose Poland, a country now key to aid for Ukraine, to announce that Canada will quadruple its military spending. It was no coincidence but a clear message to Europe. Canada is at the forefront, not behind the United States. For many Americans who grew up believing their country was the center of the free world, seeing Canada take the lead generates both pride and bewilderment. Pride because they share values, but bewilderment because Canada is doing it without us. Let us not forget that Trump not only imposed tariffs but also threatened annexations and destabilized treaties, humiliating Canada before the world. Today, Carney responds with a strategy of emancipation, not revenge, and that word, emancipation, is what truly worries. While Washington debates whether to increase NATO's budget, Canada is already making decisions and signing checks. While we debate here whether clean energy is worth it, they partner with Europe on renewable and nuclear projects, while Trump insists on rescuing obsolete industries. Carney is building the economy of tomorrow. The conclusion is clear. If another trade war arises tomorrow, Canada will not be on its knees waiting for a deal. It will have alternatives, partners, and resilience. The hardest part to accept is that it all began because Canada was treated as subordinate, not as a partner. Now the table has turned, and the United States is in the uncomfortable position. As a citizen, I worry about what this means for our immediate future. If Canada no longer depends on us, if Europe looks more to Ottawa than Washington, and if Ukraine trusts Canada more than the United States, the inevitable question is, what path will we take now? We are at the beginning of the decline of American supremacy, even within its own continent. This moment represents a point of no return. In Kiev, Carney demonstrated his leadership. In Warsaw, he strengthened military commitment. And in Brussels, he could consolidate economic independence through strategic alliances. Meanwhile, populist rhetoric, tariff threats, and empty promises persist in Washington. Carney has placed Canada on the world stage in a way that shakes the foundations of the old order, creating an undeniable impact. The question that remains, which no American can ignore, is the most uncomfortable one. Have we lost Canada as a subordinate ally forever, and are we prepared to accept it as an independent power